The best way to think about Spreadsheet.com is that it's the spreadsheet you already know, with the power of a database and the productivity of a project management system all rolled into one, combined with easy-to-use automations, integrations, and real-time updates. That's why we call it the all-in-one spreadsheet. In this introduction, we'll walk you through the basics of Spreadsheet.com. If you've ever used a spreadsheet, it should look pretty familiar. First and foremost, Spreadsheet.com works the same as a modern online spreadsheet system, so it's a natural place to create things like invoices and basic budgets and plans and financial models, just about everything else you use a spreadsheet for. You can have any number of worksheets in each workbook. You have control over cell-level styling and formatting, row heights, merge cells, and everything else. And as expected, you can write formulas using the same syntax that you already know. Spreadsheet.com supports over 400 standard spreadsheet formula functions, using the same function names and syntax as Excel and Google Sheets. It's fully online and collaborative, so any changes you or anyone makes are automatically saved and synced in real time. You can also use channels at the workbook, row, and cell level to send messages and add comments. Spreadsheet.com also has full version history on every workbook, allowing you to go back to any point in time to retrieve specific data using copy and paste, or do a complete workbook restore. One of the key capabilities of Spreadsheet.com that doesn't exist in other traditional spreadsheets is data types. Spreadsheet.com allows you to go beyond numbers and text in cells with over 25 different data types, ranging from icon sets and ratings, to select and multi-select dropdowns, user selectors, links to rows in other worksheets, and file attachments that live in cells, with drag-and-drop upload, thumbnails, and document preview. Data types in Spreadsheet.com can be applied like formatting and styling at the column, range, and individual cell level. For example, in this candidates worksheet, we've set column E to have the icon set data type, and column G to have the select data type with a defined set of options. Here we've set cell A2 to the attachment data type, so we could put an employee referral program document right here in the header of the worksheet. And in this invoice, we've set the data type of range of cells in column B so we can attach photos of products for the customer. Spreadsheet.com allows you to give names to columns, and these names automatically appear in the worksheet's column headers. But it also supports the concept of a defined table header row. Often when creating spreadsheets, we create a row near the top of the sheet to serve as our table header row. So, Spreadsheet.com supports this with a feature called the table header row. If you want to have a set of rows above your table region and still be able to define column-level data types, you can do that in Spreadsheet.com by setting a row as the table header row, as we've done here on row 4, where you can see a database icon in the row header. You can update the name of a column in the table header row itself, and you can use the context menu to change the data type of a column, as well as filter, sort, hide columns, and more. When you define a filter on a worksheet that has a table header row, the filter does not apply to all the rows above it in the header region. This makes rows in the header region a great place to do summary calculations using functions like subtotal, which only operate on rows that are visible and have not been filtered out. Spreadsheet.com allows you to define any number of views of your worksheet data. From the View selector, click the plus New View button and choose your view type. The default view type for a worksheet is the sheet view. Additional view types like Kanban, Gantt, and Forms allow you to capture and work with worksheet data in completely different ways. Most view types allow you to define filters and sorts, which get saved as part of that view's configuration. For example, you can define a new sheet view to only show a subset of data in your worksheet using filters, and then sort it. Depending on the view type, you will have different configuration options, but every view, no matter its type, can be locked to prevent other users making changes to that view's configuration. You can also control who has access to each view by defining view permissions. By default, Everyone who has access to the workbook can see each view in each worksheet. But if you set a view to private, you can control who can see that view and who can't. Kanban views allow you to visualize and work with rows as cards in stacks. This is useful for things like data organization, workflow, and project management use cases. Each row in the table region of your worksheet is shown as a card in a set of scrollable stacks. You can configure how row cards are organized into stacks by using the Stacked By view setting. You can also configure what information is shown in cards with the Card Configuration dialog. For example, if you have an attachment column, you can choose to show or hide a large thumbnail as a cover image at the top of the cards. You can also choose whether or not to show column labels and control which columns to display, and the order to display them in. So each card represents a row in the worksheet. And clicking on a card opens the Row Details dialog, where you can edit that row and explore related rows. Moving a card from one stack to another changes the corresponding value for that row. For example, moving this row from the lamp stack to the desk lamp stack changes the category cell values in that row. And you can see this change reflected in other views, such as when you switch to a sheet view. With Spreadsheet.com, you can use Gantt views to visualize and manage work schedules and relationships between tasks. For example, here we have a product launch plan spreadsheet with columns for start date, end date, duration, status, owner, and more. Now let's say we want to see a timeline of this project and manage it more visually. We can do this easily in Spreadsheet.com with a Gantt view. To create a new Gantt view in any worksheet, go to the View selector and click Plus New View, then choose Gantt as the view type. We'll call this our launch timeline. Click Save. And now Spreadsheet.com automatically builds a Gantt timeline for us with a Gantt chart to the right of the spreadsheet. The Project Management dialog opens, allowing us to make changes to the way Spreadsheet.com handles project data in this worksheet. Here you can define which columns are used for project management, and control settings for working days and hours, and whether or not to enable task dependencies, which we'll review in a few minutes. In the Gantt view, you'll see your full spreadsheet to the left, and you can add filters, sorts, and other view-specific settings, just like a sheet view. Over to the right, you'll see the Gantt chart with a special Gantt toolbar above it. Here you can zoom in and out of the timeline to get a better view. A divider between the Gantt chart and your spreadsheet can be moved easily to see more or less of the chart. And you'll notice that the chart stays in sync with your rows as you scroll. It even automatically adjusts when you change the height of your rows. In Gantt views, each row is shown as a taskbar in the Gantt chart based on its start date and end date values. When you drag a bar to move a task in the timeline, you'll notice that the dates and duration values in the worksheet adjust automatically. Resizing a taskbar also changes its start date or end date and its duration. The optional percentage complete column value is used to visually change the taskbars to show how complete each task is. And if your task rows are indented to form a hierarchy, parent rows become fixed and automatically adjust based on child row values. For example, let's make this launch event plan task a child of the launch schedule task. You'll notice that launch schedule now becomes a parent row and auto-adjusts whenever we make changes to its child rows. Gantt views in Spreadsheet.com also support task dependencies. If you have dependencies enabled in your worksheet's project management settings, you'll be able to assign predecessors to each task. A predecessor column uses the related row data type to define the relationship between tasks. So you can assign predecessors in the worksheet or by dragging and dropping connections between taskbars in the Gantt view itself. When a predecessor task is changed, all dependent tasks below it change as well. For example, we can see that our Go-To Market Strategy task is on hold, so let's give it some more time. you'll notice all of the tasks that are dependent on it get pushed out by that additional amount of time. Moving dependent tasks back shows you a dashed line, indicating that the dependency will become invalid. If you choose to proceed, you'll notice that the dependency breaks, and you'll have the opportunity to undo the change. Tasks with a duration value of 0 are shown as diamonds, which are milestones in project management. So, here we have a task called Launch at the end of our product launch plan, and we'll set this to start on October 17th. We'll give it a duration of 0 to set it as a milestone task. And then we'll make sure that the launch cannot happen without the website being done first. So we'll make that a dependency. Now we can use the critical path option to highlight the longest sequence of tasks that must be completed to successfully conclude the project from start to finish. You can control the appearance of each Gantt view with the Gantt Appearance Settings dialog. Here you can change which column values are used for the taskbar labels, and you can change how taskbars are colored. For example, you can define a custom color for all taskbars. Or you can choose a different select column to use for coloring. For example, here we have a select column called Type, so we can change the taskbar colors to match the task type. With Spreadsheet.com, you can use form views to quickly and easily build online forms, where each form submission becomes a new row in your worksheet. For example, here we have a worksheet with candidate information. And you'll notice that we have columns already defined for first name, last name, resume, email, and so on. Now let's say we want candidates to be able to apply on our website, and each application should automatically become a row in this worksheet. We can do this easily in Spreadsheet.com with a form view. To create a new form view for any worksheet, go to the View selector and click Plus New View, then choose Form as the view type. We'll call this our application form. Click Save, and now Spreadsheet.com automatically builds a form for us and includes the first 5 columns as fields by default. First, let's add a description to our form. We can brand it with our company logo. And maybe set a nice background color. Now let's move the resume field down below email. You can do this just by dragging and dropping it, or selecting it and using the arrow buttons. Status is something we use internally to track a candidate's progress in our hiring process. So we don't want to expose that, but we do want new candidates to have a default status. So we'll make this field hidden and set its default value to Applied. We'll also make email, resume, last name, and first name required too. And we probably want to allow candidates to provide a phone number, maybe as an optional field, but we don't have a column defined for that already in our worksheet. So we can create a new column right here in the form view by clicking this plus button above where we want the field to appear, and then choose New Field. Now we can change the data type of the new column by clicking on the column settings on the right, which will bring up that column's data type dialog. Here we can choose Phone as the data type and give the column a name. Now we also want to capture the source of each new candidate as coming from our website, so we'll add the source column as a field and make it hidden, and default it to the company website value. All right, now our form fields are ready, and we can change the default text for the form's Submit button to say Apply. And then below that, we can configure what happens when the form is submitted. For example, let's change the confirmation message that appears when the form is submitted. We can also have an email automatically sent to us, so we'll enable that option. Now our form looks ready to go, so let's try it out. Click Open Form to open the form as a user would see it. and let's make a test submission. Attach a resume file, and click Apply. Now, if we go back to our candidates worksheet and switch to a sheet view, we can see that our new candidate row came through with all the information from the form, including the hidden fields and resume attachment. And because we configured the form to email us whenever there's a submission, we see that email come through right away. This notification provides an easy way to jump to that row in the worksheet. Back in our form view, we can easily get a link to the form or code for embedding it in any external site by clicking the Share Form button. If at any time you want to disable the form, just uncheck this box and visitors will no longer be able to access the form. One of the most powerful features of Spreadsheet.com is that it allows you to connect worksheets like tables in a relational database so that rows become linked together like records. This allows you to build some pretty powerful things in Spreadsheet.com with just a few clicks. For example, here we have an asset management workbook with two worksheets called Assets and Vendors that are linked together. Each of the rows in our Assets worksheet was purchased from a vendor, and each vendor is a row in our Vendors worksheet. So here, column G in our Assets worksheet contains links to rows in the Vendors worksheet. You can click on a row link to open that row in a form dialog. This allows you to view and even edit all the information in that row, even though it lives in a different worksheet. For example, here we're looking at a row from the Vendors worksheet without actually leaving the Assets worksheet. This is all accomplished by simply using the related row data type. And you'll notice here in column G, we've set this column to contain links to rows in the Vendors worksheet, in the same Asset Management workbook. You can also open any row in the current worksheet by clicking the expand icon in the row header at the left. You can then drill down to related rows, and you can just keep going. Because Spreadsheet.com is both a spreadsheet and relational database, there is no end to the number of worksheets and rows you can link together. So we've just shown a simple example where rows are linked between two worksheets in the same workbook, but Spreadsheet.com lets you link worksheets together across entirely different spreadsheets, even those in different folders. So now, we'll walk through an example of how easy this is to do. So let's say in practice, each of our assets is in use by an employee, but all of our employee data exists in a different workbook called Employee Directory, which lives in our HR folder. Rather than duplicate that data, it would be much better to link to it so we maintain a single source of truth for our employee data. So, we can do this simply by inserting a column or changing column H to the related row data type. And let's call this Employees, because we're going to link to rows in the Employees worksheet of our Employee Directory workbook. And now we navigate to the HR folder, open our Employee Directory workbook, and select the Employees worksheet. We also uncheck the Allow Linking to Multiple Rows checkbox because we want to make sure only one employee can be assigned to an asset at any given time. And now we can assign employees to assets. Once a link is established, we can see the employee's details by clicking on the row link and then drilling down to anything else related to that employee. For example, the location where she works. You'll notice at the top of the Row Details dialog, it shows you where the row lives. If it lives in a different workbook, you can just click on the link to open that workbook and view the whole worksheet. And here you'll notice in this example that Spreadsheet.com automatically added an Assets column to the Employees worksheet because the relationship is two-sided, just like a relational database by default. Now let's say you want to see more than just the name of linked employees in the Assets worksheet, like maybe a photo and email address. Again, instead of duplicating that information, it's much better to link to it. And now that a relationship between the Assets worksheet and Employee worksheet exists, you can easily pull related information into the Assets worksheet using the related row lookup data type. So in our example, let's change column I to use the related row lookup data type. And now you'll see you can pick columns to look up based on existing relationships in the worksheet. So here we'll select Email to pull in the employee's email address and name the column Email. And now you can see all the email addresses automatically populate. And this happens now automatically whenever you link another row. With Spreadsheet.com, you can indent rows to create parent-child relationships. Parent rows can be collapsed and expanded by clicking on the plus and minus icons in the primary column. To indent a row or a group of rows, select any cell or range of cells and click the Indent button. You can also click Outdent to turn a child row back into a sibling. Child rows always stay under their parent row, regardless of sorting and filtering. For example, if we sort this view by task name, you'll notice that each level of the hierarchy is sorted independently, so that child rows always remain under their parent rows. Spreadsheet.com also provides 4 unique functions designed for working with data in row hierarchies. For example, here our product plan parent node is set to end earlier than some of its child nodes, which is probably not what we want. So, we can use the descendant cells function in combination with the standard spreadsheet max function to automatically adjust the parent row's end date to match any row below it in the hierarchy with the latest end date. With Spreadsheet.com, you can automate repetitive work and integrate with other popular work tools using automations. Automations in Spreadsheet.com can be created by anyone. You don't need to know how to write code or create complicated scripts. For example, here we have a product launch plan spreadsheet that's shared with a team. Each row on the table region represents a task with a start date, end date, status, owner, and more. Now let's build some automations to make sure the project runs smoothly. So we'll click on the robot icon in the header to open the automations dialog for this workbook. Here you'll be taken into a library of ready-to-go recipes you can use to quickly build automations. At the top right, you'll see a drop-down showing all of the worksheets in your workbook. Each worksheet in your workbook can have its own set of automations defined. So let's say we'd like to set up an automation on our tasks worksheet to remind teammates whenever they have a task starting soon. Looking at recipes involving dates, here's a recipe that looks like it will work for sending reminders to users. So we click the Add to Worksheet button to add it to our tasks worksheet, and this takes us into the visual automation editor. Each automation always has a trigger block and at least one action block. The trigger block determines what triggers the automation to run. In this case, we want our automation to be triggered at 8 a.m. 2 days before each task's start date. So we click the On variable, and instead of same day, we choose a custom time and change it from 1 day to 2 days. At this point, if we try to save the automation, we'll get validation errors because we haven't fully configured it yet. Spreadsheet.com checks each automation before saving it to make sure it's valid. All invalid variables will be highlighted in red, and hovering over, a warning message will explain what's missing. Here, we need to specify a date column to use for the trigger. So we select Start Date and choose 8 a.m. for the time. Now we need to configure the notification that gets sent and who it gets sent to. This happens in the Action block. Here we want to send a notification to whoever is assigned as the task owner. So we'll select the User variable and choose the Owner column. Now we click the Notification variable to define the message we want to send. This opens the Message dialog, where we need to define a subject and a message body. In these areas, we can use a left bracket character or the plus buttons on the right to insert column values within the message. We can also optionally choose to include a link to the row within the message. So now we could move forward with this automation as is, but conditional logic makes automations much more powerful. Hover over the connector, click plus, and add a condition block. You'll notice the automation automatically expands, and you now have 2 action blocks, one for when the conditions are met and another for when they are not met. Here we'll add a filter condition to only send our notification if the task's status is not started. As you use the automation editor, you'll notice you have the ability to add as many branches to your automations as you want. As a workflow gets bigger, you can easily move around by clicking and dragging. and zoom in and out with the mouse wheel, trackpad, or the zoom buttons at the top left. Alright, so our automation looks ready to go, but before we save it and put it into production, it's usually a good idea to do a test run to make sure it works as expected. Clicking the Test Run button allows you to choose a row to run the automation on. Select a row and click Run. And now we can see a test run log appear that we can expand to review. We can see the message was sent, and it appears in our email as expected with a link to the row. As your automations grow, sometimes it's helpful to give custom names to each block. This makes debugging and reviewing automation run logs a lot easier. For example, we can rename this action block to Task Reminder Actions. And now when we run it, it's easier to see which path was taken. Before saving our automation, let's give it a custom name. And click Save. Now let's create another automation to send a Slack message to the whole team whenever a task is completed. This time, we want our automation to trigger when our status column changes to completed. Since our status column has the Select data type, all we have to do is pick the value we're looking for and then define our action. Now, in the action block, we want to send a message to Slack. So we pick the Send Slack Message action, and then follow the steps to configure Slack integration. Now we can select the Slack channel we want to send the message to, and then define the message. Before we test out our Slack automation, let's take a look at some of the other available action types. The first 4 action types allow us to create, update, copy, and move rows from one worksheet to another, even between different workbooks in different folders. For example, let's use the Create Row action to create a new row in our Archived Tasks worksheet whenever a task is completed. First, we pick the target worksheet. Then click the row variable to configure the mapping between the source and target worksheets. Now that we have multiple actions, we can choose which sequence to run them in by reordering them in the action block. Okay, so let's save this automation and try it out. Now, when we change a task to completed, we see that a new row gets created in our Archived Tasks worksheet. And now we can see a message come through to our team's Slack channel. Sharing is fast and easy in Spreadsheet.com. From your homepage, you can share a folder by clicking the Share button next to it. If you are an owner of the folder, you can select from 6 different permission levels. Each user you share a folder with will be able to access everything in that folder at the assigned permission level. Similarly, you can share individual workbooks by clicking the Share button at the top right. Again, you can select from 6 different permission levels for each user depending on how much access you want them to have. You'll notice that the editor, commenter, and viewer permission levels do not have the licensed user tag because they are always free, even in paid Spreadsheet.com plans. Importing an Excel spreadsheet or a CSV file into Spreadsheet.com can be done in just a couple clicks. Google Sheets is not yet supported, so you'll need to export your Google Sheets spreadsheet to an Excel file and use that to import for now. From your home page, click Plus New Workbook and choose Import from Excel or CSV. Drag and drop your file or select it manually, and then click Import. Spreadsheet.com will import all the worksheets in your spreadsheet and maintain all of the cell styling, formatting, and formulas as is, even cross-sheet formulas. One thing we always recommend as a best practice is to set the table header row in each of your worksheets wherever this is applicable. Once your spreadsheet is imported, then you can use the power of data types, views, and relationships to bring your spreadsheet alive as a collaborative application. To learn more about Spreadsheet.com and find more overview videos, you can visit our online help center. You can also ask a question and find answers in our growing community forum by clicking Ask a Question in the Help menu. If you'd rather contact us directly and privately, you can submit a ticket by clicking Contact Us. Regardless of which way you choose, we really look forward to hearing from you, and we can't wait to see what you create with Spreadsheet.com.